I have a predicament. I am in the mood to make something really unique, really original, something kitbash, something I can really call my own. But the problem is, I am currently working on my Star Wars Legion army. Now sure, I could take this box and paint it up any way I want and that would be absolutely fine. But my brain is telling me it really should look like the box art. These guys are from the movie, that's how I remember them, and so that's how they should be. And it's kind of reminding me of why Warhammer 40,000 works so much as a miniature war game. You really have free reign to do whatever you want. 22 different factions, hundreds of sub-factions. The Warhammer universe is so expansive, almost anything you do is gonna be pretty much accurate to the lore. So what am I to do? Should I get rid of this and start working on my anime-inspired guard? No. I actually think adhering to the lore and adhering to how things really are in this universe, putting those restrictions on myself, is actually going to make me enjoy this more. It'll help me make those decisions. And through the power of green stuff and glue, I'm gonna make these guys spectacular. These guys are already awesome because they are Imperial Scout Troopers, the Imperial Army's elite reconnaissance troopers. Soldiers so elite, they lost to some teddy bears with rocks. There's two flavors of Scout Troopers, Infiltrators and Snipers, and I want to focus on the Sniper variety. To add more to these miniatures than is already sculpted in the plastic, I broke out my green stuff, a 2-part epoxy putty that has a long working time and dries hard. Now I don't have that much experience with green stuff, there's only one way to get more, and that's to try. And this project should be pretty easy because I'm thinking of making some ponchos. You might not know this, but I am quite a seamstress. I have made many garments, and ponchos are about as simple as it gets. I took a ball of green stuff and placed it between 2 pieces of parchment paper and used a rolling pin to make it flat. The rolling pin is fancy, but honestly a beer bottle probably would have worked better. Something a little heavier and bigger would have given me more leverage. Now I need a circle. I found a cap I thought was about the right size and I squished it down until it cut out the circle. This worked, but I should have put some Vaseline around the rim because now my cap is covered in green stuff. I found a pen that was just about right to give me my inner hole, and now I took this donut-shaped piece of clay and draped it over the model. A wet toothbrush would work, but a silicone brush will do the best job of poking and prodding the green stuff without leaving marks on the surface. I got the front looking pretty good, but there was way too much material in the back. I used some scissors to cut off the excess, and I almost made it work, but doing all this fussing really squished and tore the putty, and I decided to start over. I made a new circle slightly smaller and I rolled it out thinner. This will let me get crisper folds in this poncho. And the top of my super glue gave me a much tighter neck hole. Now it was time to drape the garment again, and this went much better. I pulled down the clay fabric evenly until it was hanging naturally. It's not perfect and it looks a little bit like he's wearing a neoprene gaming mat more than scale fabric, but by the end, it'll look perfect. I don't know how many of you guys can relate to this, but I have a really hard time just vomiting creativity or just coming up with something or inventing something. And the whole wide world is open to me, I tend to get writer's block, or in this case, painter's and modeling block. But give me an initial idea, a little nugget, a little something to hold on to, and I can take it and run with it. These scout troopers, maybe they find that their white armor, the symbol of Imperial authority, is not helping them achieve their mission goals, and they've covered themselves up in some way, or camouflaged themselves. Maybe they've thrown on a poncho, and within that poncho, they've covered it in camouflage and sticks and leaves to make themselves a little bit harder to spot. Maybe they've done something to their long rifle to make it a little bit more covert. Maybe these guys aren't even normal scout troopers, but they're the elite scout troopers. They're the guys who are really good at infiltrating and achieving their mission goals. All of a sudden, that initial restriction of scout troopers should look like scout troopers has let me evolve this idea into something that I can really get excited about. And that, I think, is some of the joys of the thing should look like the thing. But maybe it doesn't have to, and maybe that's even better. For the resting sniper, I decided to make more of a cape shape, putting the neck hole closer to the edge. This isn't typically how capes are patterned, but I figured they made these out in the field, cobbling them together out of whatever they could find. I made up a little hood, cutting a small rectangle of clay and wrapping it over his dome and tucking it under his neck. And on my second sniper, I left his hood down, squishing the rectangle down onto his shoulders. Green stuff sticks pretty well to itself, so I didn't have to use any glue for this. Look at these fellows with their pea-pod green cloaks. I want to do something similar on the guns, but I don't want to use more green stuff. It's a little bit too thick. I have these name tag stickers and this will be just the thing. I cut long strips of this and then wound them around the barrel of the rifle. The sticky back kept it down, and to make sure it was permanent, I dripped some super glue over it. I glued these guys down to the bases, and speaking of those bases, Star Wars Legion has different colored bases for the different armies, so I don't even paint the base rims. I leave them bare plastic. And to protect them from the paint, I put liquid mask over them. This stuff is very useful, although it does destroy any brush it touches. Now, I was about to start painting, but I had this wild idea. These capes should have some texture, like a real-life ghillie suit. I brushed on some wood glue and used these scale leaves to add in that texture, leaving it patchy. If I did full fluffy leaves, it would look a little bit too much like Liberace. I'm really digging these guys. I now have something unique, something that didn't come in this box. There's the Scouts, and then there's My Scouts, now streaming only on Disney+. Now it's time to get a little paint on these suckers, and speaking of paint, today's sponsor is gonna help with that. Cobalt Keep, makers of the finest magnet-ready bases and display cases around, have a new product to help us get the most out of our hobby, the dual palette wet and dry palette combo. This is a wet palette that comes fully loaded. It of course comes with a sponge and pre-cut palette paper, but that's only scratching the surface of what this palette has to offer. The dual palette has built-in slots perfect for holding water, mixing paint, or keeping your paint safe from tipping over. It also has some convenient brush storage and a dry palette that doubles as the lid for the wet palette. This features a honeycomb design with cells perfect for mixing up colors, and to top it all off, a clear lid that lets you see the colors on your palette without having to be removed. This lid has a removable rubber plug so you can let your paint breathe a little, and get just the right amount of evaporation, keeping your paints nice and fresh while you're away. All these parts lock together so you can make the perfect painting sandwich, combining multiple wet and dry palettes together into a tower of paint. You can follow the link in the description below, and remember to use our coupon code EOB10 to save 10% on the dual palette and Cobalt Keep paintbrushes at checkout. Although these Scouts will be white, I started off with a black prime. I can't reach my paintbrush under those ponchos and capes, so a black prime will fill in these areas with dark shadows, and I won't have to touch them again. Then I sprayed some white paint in a heavy zenithal. I really want to get those cloaks right, and I think step one is gonna have to be paint the base, and that's the environment these guys are living in, and then I can look at that, and that'll help me to get these capes just right. The weird thing about my Imperial basing scheme is I have absolutely no idea what the recipe is. The first thing I painted was these Death Troopers, and it's perfect. And I have never again been able to find the exact colors I used. I have gone through all my brown paints, and never again have I recreated the look perfectly. This Mournfang Brown is sorta close, I guess. I also think it was a wash I used before. A little of this onto the palette mixed with some water and flow aid. Comparing this to the OG base, it's a little bit too red, so I took a more desaturated brown and mixed this in, and it got much closer in color. I slobbered this onto the base, and for the cliffs I painted these with the gray paint. For those who know, the planet is Korriban. It's pretty darn close, maybe 90–95% there, but there's still a little something missing. It's pretty darn close though. I'm gonna write that down right now. Who knew brown dirt could be so elusive? I took this brown color, watered it down further, and painted it over the ponchos and cloaks. Being gentle on the leaves, I don't wanna knock them off. Now that's a look, but I can push it further with a little speckling. I put a dark brown into my airbrush and turned the PSI down to almost 0, letting just enough air through to spit out small dots of paint, and I sprinkled these onto the cloth. After a round of dark splatter, I did a round of tan splatter to complete the camouflage. Heck yeah! Oh, I'm in love with these cloaks. This is the sort of stuff that historical wargamers do really well. Taking something from the real life and translating it in scale onto miniatures. Really digging it. And now it's time just to paint some Scout Troopers. I was careful to not get brown over the white zenithal, so the armor should be easy. I took some Nuln Oil black wash and put this over everything. This will do some nice shading. It did stain things darker, so I went back over the white armor with white paint, getting it back up to bright white. On the smaller areas, I used a dry brush to get the white paint down. I took some Skeleton Horde contrast paint and put this over the sniper wrap. Perhaps they stole this idea from watching the Tusken Raiders. Then I made up a black glaze out of some contrast paint and a blue wash. This mix will make the black look nice and clean, especially next to all the warm browns on the rest of the models. After the Scout's clothing was painted, I went back to the weapon wraps and highlighted these a little bit more with some tan paint. I mixed this by putting white paint into the contrast paint. Yes, you can use contrast paint to mix. It works really well and helps keep your colors consistent. The PVC plastic that original Legion models were made out of is a little bit on the squishy side, but the details are still decently crisp. Almost as crispy as the wargaming terrain available on our Patreon. Over there we have a new STL terrain set every single month. This month we have the Corpse Cannery, a factory where food is made by humans from humans. These sexy snipers are getting pretty darn close. I want to add a red glow effect because we all know in science fiction, goggles and scopes glow. And I think while I have that red on my palette, I'm gonna try to add some freehand tally marks. These guys are snipers, maybe every time they get a confirmed kill, they add a little mark to their helmet. I painted the scopes red and watered down the paint until it was almost nothing and glazed this over the wraps. These wraps are perfect, a nice light surface to bounce the light off of. It would not be nearly as striking glowing onto the dark black of the metal. The thing giving off the light must be brighter than the light being cast, so I put a dot of pink in the middle of the eyepiece. And to make the tally marks, I took my best paintbrush and mixed the red with a little bit of paint retardant to keep it from drying and painted on the tally marks. This was definitely a hold my breath kind of freehand. There's so little. I made sure that each guy had a different number of tallies. It'd be very weird if every single guy had a perfect 17 score. I rubbed off the masking fluid with my fingers and the model was done, but then I had another idea. I took my beige grass tufts and put these over the bases, and then took some micro tufts and placed these onto the cloaks. A little bit more color and texture to add to the camouflage. These guys are gonna be hard to spot. These are the only Star Wars Legion models I've ever converted, but I definitely think I'm gonna be doing a lot more. You could say the Force has awoken. Now I gotta get these guys ranked up with the rest of my Imperial army, and I gotta show you guys my Imperial army because it's a bit of a mess. My Star Wars Legion army is the saddest army in my collection. It's the least finished, but unfortunately, most every single unit is in progress. Of things that are actually finished, the Sniper Scouts add a ton because almost nothing is finished. Star Wars Legion is such a fun game, and I've actually played a ton of it, but never with the Empire. And that's why so many of these models are unfinished, because I just don't play with this army very much. I've never played with it, and so I've left so many things in a state of unfinished, and that is the worst possible place a miniature can be. When there's some paint on it, but there's still on blocks, or their base is half built, or the base is completely unpainted like all of my stormtroopers. I really should just get a move on in this army and get at least everything on this table completely finished. I also have so many more things new in box that haven't even made their way to the painting desk at all. The Empire need a little bit more love, and I think one of the ways I can give it more love is to give them the Sniper Scout treatment. These guys are by far the most impressive and the most interesting models in this collection. And I think the fact that they are based on Star Wars has been holding me back from doing that. They should look like the movie. But there are a million little things I could do to this army to bring them all up to the level of the new Scouts. One of my stormtroopers is painted up with the red armor from the Star Wars Battlefront game. I could sprinkle that in here and there, and it would add such a lovely spice to this collection. This is just an army of stormtroopers from the movies, but it's my collection of stormtroopers, and I can make them look however I want. And the fact that they exist in the Star Wars universe, I can use as a tool to help me make those decisions. Thanks for watching.